right now we're in fall, and like I said, we just started going over fall. So I'm going to turn it over to James, and he's going to go over fall fishing and your baits and all that. But I'll turn it over to you, James.
Yeah.
All right. We kind of went over the river stuff already, but on lakes and stuff like that, what would be some of your top five go-to baits for fall?
I love fishing buzz baits in the fall. Buzz baits, spinner baits. That's I like covering water, and you can always slow down after you find an area that's got fish. But as long as the water's still, if it's 60 degrees or warmer, and we haven't had a huge cold front or something, I love fishing top water. And I'll fish that spinner bait up real high in the water column a lot in the fall, burning it and stuff. Just the fish are starting to move back in, the shad are starting to move back in the creeks, and you want to get back, you'll notice if they're in the first third, the middle third, or in the very backs of the creeks. And if you can find the bait fish this time of year, you can usually find fish around that area. Buzz bait, spinner bait usually can find you some fish pretty good. And then, as the water gets a little cooler, if we have some really cold nights, I love throwing flat-sided crankbaits. That's one of my favorite things to do in the fall. It's just a real shad imitate. Most of the time in the fall, we don't have the rain that we have in the spring. So the water clarity the water's a little bit cleaner. The water clarity is a lot better, and so those tight wiggle, more shad imitating baits seem to work a little bit better with a clearer water than like the square bills, the wider wobbling, more aggressive baits. I like to fish the flat-sided baits in the fall as long as the water color is good and clear.
On your spinner baits, what blade combinations do you run normally?
Normally, I throw a double willow. Most of the time, this time of year in the springtime, I'll fish, a tandem blades, but mostly in the fall, I throw a double willow, try to keep it up high in the water column. I'm looking for some pretty good aggressive bites. Fishing seawalls a lot if you're on a reservoir that has a lot of seawalls and stuff. It's just something where fish they position where they can chase shad. The shad can't escape from them. They get them up against the seawall, they're able to feed pretty good, especially early in the mornings. Anytime there's shade on those walls, it's really good. But yeah, I like a double willow in the fall more than anything. And buzz bait, I throw a black one a lot during the year, but during the fall, I like to throw a white one a lot more. It just seems like that once the fish really get on a shad pattern, that white seems to get a few more bites. So that's the buzz bait and spinner bait deal.
On the spinner bait deal, your blade color combination, which one do you pick most of?
In the fall like this, usually if we have that clear water, I throw, 2 nickel blades or just silver blades and just stick with that. And usually it's a pretty, I don't run really big blades in the fall. The fish are usually feeding on this year's hatch, which is still pretty small. And it seems to work really good. In the springtime, I use a lot bigger blades and, go with off-colored blades because of the watercolor a little bit more.
Okay. Josh, did you have any questions that you wanted to add?
Now, a lot of mine, when it comes to topwater fishing, especially like you're talking about buzz baits and stuff like that, what is your line combination with topwater baits like that? Do you still go mono, or do you still start go with fluorocarbon, a lot of that?
No, on a buzz bait, I fish a buzz bait probably more than anybody on tour. I don't know that, but probably if the water's over 52 degrees, I'll throw a buzz bait. I designed that Canterbury Pro Buzz from Dirty Jigs Tackle 6 or 7 years ago. I finished second in the Forest Wood Cup twice throwing that buzz bait. And, I've won a lot of money throwing a buzz bait. So, and everybody's got their go-tos, and a lot of people still like monofilament, but I just use a little softer rod with a lot more tip than a lot of people use. But I usually throw mine on 30 or 40 pound braid for the hookup ratio. And that softer rod will let me play them a little bit more, where some people think they lose a few fish on braid. But instead of using a monofilament that has a little stretch, I use a softer rod that gives me a little bit more play of the fish too.
Yeah, I understand that. That's kind of like, with certain top waters I use on the river and all that. I'll go with braid, but I use a softer tip rod. Like it's a frogging rod, so it's got a softer tip, but it's got a good backbone to it. So,
That's right.
So you can horse them.
In the fall, I like to, you got to have a backup bait, a follow-up bait if you get some fish to blow up on a buzzbait or something. And I throw a fluke a lot in the fall just because of the bait imitation. And, I throw it on monofilament always. And the main reason of that is because I want it to be able to sink when I stop it, pause it. I want it to be able to sink a little faster. So I use, I'll throw 17-pound fluorocarbon. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Always throw fluorocarbon on my fluke.
Yeah. Now, do you, I see some people back and forth using spinning rods with flukes and bait casted and all that. I know I use a bait caster on my fluke because when some of them big fish hit, when some of them big fish hit, man, they're aggressive when they hit that fluke.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I use a bait caster. And I used to, and probably still do, miss some fish on it and lose a few fish on a fluke, but it's because of the thickness of the bait and how much plastic you have on the hook. So I use a rod that's got a pretty good bit of backbone so I can get a hook into them too.
Now, kind of going back with your button, James, I didn't want to interrupt you. Did you have anything else before I went any further with the buzzbait?
No, that's exactly the same thing I had to do with the fluke at the national championship.
Yeah.
Remember, I was throwing a lighter rod, and I just couldn't get the hook-up ratio, so then I switched up the second day, and it was a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that too with, certain baits, like if I'm throwing a fluke up under a dock, I go with a heavier rod for one, getting them out, you know what I mean? Getting them out of there. But if I'm throwing them over points and all that stuff, I always go with just like a weightless worm rod from Falcon that we use, but works really well with that. But like I said, I know what James is talking about, missing fish sometimes. I think that's how it is. They hit it in the rod. You don't have enough time to really lay into the hook on them. The rod's so soft.
Yeah, and it's different, like he made an adjustment there, and that's good to be able to do that, to make those adjustments according to how the fish are hitting the bait, like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to your buzz baits, it's a lot of these buzz baits coming out with the, putting the frogs on them and all that stuff. Do you throw stuff like that during the fall too, or are you trying to keep with the frog when they're more towards the summer? Or does it even really matter?
No, I throw a frog on it a lot. And that's the bait that I designed. Actually, Dirty Jigs Tackle, I think, was probably, I'm not saying it was the first one that we used, because a lot of people was using a frog on it before that. The North Carolina guys, Andy Morgan or Andy Montgomery and some guys were doing that before most people. But Dirty Jigs Tackle was the first one to come out with that buzz bait designed to hold a frog on it. And that's the bait. That's the one that I designed with them. And, a lot of times in the fall, I'll put like a dipper style bait on it, or a fluke on it, a swim bait on it, and it seems to work really good that in the fall. It's just a little smaller profile than that, putting a toad on it. I designed the bait back when we came out with that bait. I was with Bruiser Baits when we came out with that buzz bait, and I designed a single body bait, single tail, it's a wider body bait, like a toad, but it was more of a bait fish imitator with 2 legs on it. And so
wow.
I still like a plastic on it. I think the hookup ratio is better. I throw ones with skirt on it a lot, but if I can get them to bite one that's a plastic body instead of a skirt, I think the hookup ratio is better. So I throw, swim baits and flukes and a frog on it a lot in the fall.
Now, do you when it comes to your color, do you keep it kind of simple? I know a lot of people, it's black, white, and chartreuse. Do you kind of keep it that simple?
Pretty much, yeah. I use a white one with a silver blade, a black with a black blade, or I will, the bait fish, when the swim baits and stuff that I put on it doesn't really matter. But there's been several times that I've caught them on a green pumpkin or something. But that's just when you're on bluegill, like you have a green pumpkin toad with dip the feet chartreuse or something. But that's about the only 3 colors I throw.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, man, on the in-depth there. And guys, hope y'all were taking notes. Chris, we